North Korea's possible mass deployment to Russia. Up to 50,000 troops could change the war in Ukraine. What if up to 50,000 North Korean soldiers were sent to Russia to support the war against Ukraine? That possibility is now attracting growing international attention. Reports have suggested that between 30,000 and 50,000 North Korean personnel could potentially be deployed to Russia in support of Moscow's war effort. If confirmed, such a deployment would represent a dramatic expansion of military cooperation between Russia and North Korea and could potentially have a significant impact on the battlefield. But there is an important question that must be answered first. Is Russia really preparing to receive tens of thousands of North Korean troops, or are these figures part of the information war surrounding the conflict? At this stage, the reported figure of 30,000 to 50,000 personnel remains a claim associated with Ukrainian sources and other reports. It has not been independently verified in full. Therefore, the numbers should be treated with caution. Nevertheless, the possibility is significant because North Korea has already been linked to military support for Russia. Previous estimates indicated that approximately 14,000 to 15,000 North Korean personnel had been involved in Russia's war effort, particularly in connection with operations in and around the Kursk region. If an additional force of up to 50,000 personnel were actually deployed, the scale of cooperation would increase dramatically. This would suggest that the relationship between Moscow and Pyongyang is moving beyond limited military assistance and toward a much broader strategic military partnership. For Russia, one of the biggest potential advantages would be manpower. The Russia-Ukraine war has become a prolonged and extremely demanding conflict requiring enormous numbers of personnel, not only for direct combat, but also for logistics, transportation, engineering, security, mine clearance, communications, and protection of military infrastructure. North Korean personnel could potentially be assigned to some of these support missions. They would not necessarily all be sent directly to the front line. Some could potentially be responsible for logistical operations, engineering work, mine clearance, guarding facilities, securing rear areas, or supporting military infrastructure. This could create an important indirect advantage for Russia. If North Korean forces take over some rear area and support responsibilities, Russia could potentially free up more of its own troops for frontline operations. In other words, the strategic importance of North Korean personnel would not necessarily come from their direct participation in every major battle. Their presence could allow Russia to redistribute its own manpower and concentrate more forces on areas considered strategically important. However, if large numbers of North Korean troops were eventually deployed directly to frontline positions, the potential impact could be much greater. Ukraine would potentially have to deal with additional personnel on the battlefield, forcing Kyiv to adjust its military planning, defensive positions, and allocation of resources. The exact role of North Korean troops would therefore be just as important as their total number. But Russia is not the only country that could benefit from this relationship. For North Korea, participation in the Russia-Ukraine conflict could provide a rare opportunity to gain experience in modern warfare. North Korea maintains a very large military force, but its troops have had limited experience fighting in a modern, large-scale conventional war. The Russia-Ukraine battlefield has become an important real-world testing ground for modern military tactics and technologies. Drones, electronic warfare, artillery, reconnaissance systems, communications, precision weapons, and rapidly changing battlefield tactics have all become central elements of the conflict. North Korean personnel involved in or supporting Russian operations could potentially gain valuable practical experience from this environment. Such experience could provide lessons for North Korea's future military planning, training, and doctrine. Therefore, the relationship between Russia and North Korea is not simply about Russia receiving additional manpower. For Pyongyang, it could also be an opportunity to strengthen its military capabilities and deepen its strategic relationship with Moscow. The political foundation for this growing relationship was strengthened in June 2024, when Russia and North Korea signed a comprehensive strategic partnership agreement. The agreement included provisions concerning mutual assistance in the event of aggression, marking a major development in relations between the two countries. Since then, military cooperation between Moscow and Pyongyang has attracted increasing attention from governments and security analysts around the world. For Russia, closer relations with North Korea can provide additional strategic and military support at a time when the war in Ukraine continues to place enormous demands on its armed forces. For North Korea, closer relations with Russia provide an opportunity to strengthen ties with a major military and geopolitical power. The interests of the two governments therefore increasingly overlap. And if the reported deployment of tens of thousands of North Korean personnel is confirmed, the consequences could extend far beyond the battlefield. The Russia-Ukraine war has already become part of a much wider geopolitical confrontation involving Russia, Ukraine, the United States, European countries, and other international partners. A large-scale North Korean military presence in Russia could further internationalize the conflict. For Ukraine and its allies, the deployment of tens of thousands of North Korean personnel could be interpreted as a major escalation. It could also increase pressure on Western governments to reassess their support for Ukraine and their response to the growing military relationship between Moscow and Pyongyang.